What if the divine didn't dwell in a temple, nor in the heavens above, but within you? What if there existed a path older than any organized religion that promises not salvation through belief, but communion through direct experience? A knowledge so profound that it bypassed words, transcended doctrine, and revealed the truth of the soul itself? This is Gnosis. Not mere knowledge, but an inner knowing and awakening that can't be described, only remembered. And once remembered, it changes everything. Gnosis was not created, it was discovered, found in silence, in symbols, in ritual, in meditation, in the space between thoughts. It called to seekers, priests, mystics, and heretics alike. But was it dangerous because it threatened the authority of priests and empires? Or because Gnosticism itself, as it developed, became fragmented, dangerous, radical, and feared? Either way, it was condemned, buried, and forgotten, at least on the surface. But stay with me until the end, because we're about to uncover the hidden history of Gnosis and how it differs from Gnosticism, the belief systems and sects that tried to contain it. And beyond that, we'll ask a deeper question. Is Gnosis still possible today? Not as a theory, but as a lived inner experience. Because if the divine spark truly lives within us, then the quest for Gnosis is not about escaping this world, it's about finally seeing it with awakened eyes. For the Gnostics, above the God who created the world and man, there exists another God, one infinitely superior, perfect, and utterly beyond comprehension. The Creator God, often equated with the Demiurge, was seen as ignorant or even malevolent, a lesser being who shaped a flawed material world. This view of reality, in which there are two gods, one superior, of pure essence, and another, a lower craftsman deity who created the material world, is known as dualism. No human being can know this God, writes Hero Aragon. And yet the Gnostics believed something radical, that we carry within us a fragment of that very divinity. They claimed to possess a hidden knowledge, gnosis, a wisdom not of the mind, but of the spirit. It wasn't theoretical. It was experiential, a direct encounter with the transcendent that could awaken the divine spark buried within us. But not all was light in this pursuit of illumination. As we learn from early sources and echoed in modern scholarship, some Gnostic teachers began to institutionalize this inner path. Knowledge, once a grace, became a guarded currency. An initiation came with a price. These so-called Gnostic masters didn't just teach, they sold salvation. They crafted systems so complex, so exclusive, that only those with means or unquestioning devotion could hope to ascend. This pattern wasn't new. Even in the earliest days of Christianity, we find a haunting prototype in Simon the Magus. The Book of Acts tells of this Samaritan magician who, upon witnessing the apostles' spiritual power, offered them money in exchange for the gift of the Holy Spirit. His name became synonymous with the corruption of the sacred, simony, the buying and selling of spiritual power. In the tradition of early Christian polemic, Simon came to represent the first Christian Gnostic master, one who grasped at heaven for personal gain, not for divine union. Many Gnostic sects followed this archetype. They cloaked divine wisdom in secrecy, wrapped it in complex cosmologies, and offered it only to the initiated for a price. As History of Spirituality of the Church Fathers notes, this hidden elitism was a key point of tension with the emerging Christian church. Gnostic claims to exclusive esoteric knowledge clashed with the church's growing insistence on universality, humility, and doctrinal clarity. Where the Gnostics offered sacred complexity, the church sought accessible salvation. As Eliphaz Levi later lamented, the Gnostics caused the Christians to prohibit Gnosis, and the official sanctuary was closed off to higher initiation. The spiritual damage wasn't only theological, it was structural. Gnostic elitism challenged the ecclesiastical order, sowed spiritual confusion, and commodified mystery. Perhaps this is one reason why the early church reacted so fiercely. Not only because of theology, but because Gnosticism fragmented the unity of faith, blurred the line between mysticism and manipulation, and birthed spiritual castes. To understand the radical worldview of many Gnostic sects, we must first introduce a key figure in their cosmology, the Demiurge. The concept of the Demiurge originates in Plato's Timaeus, where he is portrayed not as evil, but as a benevolent cosmic artisan, a divine craftsman who shapes the material world by imprinting it with eternal, ideal forms. In this view, the Demiurge is limited, but not malevolent. He works with pre-existing matter to produce an ordered universe, reflecting, albeit imperfectly, the divine realm of perfect ideas. For Plato, the Demiurge is part of a hierarchical cosmos where reason governs creation. But the Gnostics took this concept in a radically different direction. For them, the Demiurge was not simply limited, he was ignorant, arrogant, and sometimes even malevolent. Far from being a noble creator, the Gnostic Demiurge was seen as a blind god who believed himself to be supreme. In their mythology, this being sometimes identified with the God of the Old Testament fashioned the material world as a flawed prison, trapping the divine spark of spirit within matter. He is often portrayed as Yaldabaoth, the lion-faced ruler of the lower heavens, who proclaims, "I am God and there is no other beside me," unaware of the true source beyond him. In this inversion, the material world is not a reflection of the divine, but a distortion of veil that conceals the spirit's true origin and keeps humanity in ignorance. Some Gnostic currents took this even further, like the Marcionites, who believed that the God of the Old Testament was not just different, but fundamentally evil. To them, Jesus came not from this creator God, but from a higher, unknown Father, a God of love and light who had been hidden until Christ revealed him. This idea, radical and subversive, was just one of many competing Gnostic worldviews. Marcion rejected any connection between Jesus and the Hebrew scriptures, going so far as to eliminate all of the Old Testament references from his version of the gospel. For Marcion, the God of Jesus, the God of light and love, was entirely distinct from the God of the Old Testament, whom he viewed as a lower, antagonistic deity. This theological stance was so provocative that Marcion became the first person ever to be officially excommunicated by the early church. His teachings, though condemned, sparked a theological crisis that forced the church to begin defining what would later become the canon of Scripture. As noted in the Apothegms of the Desert Fathers, the early Christian monk Saint Anthony once echoed a sentiment deeply resonant with Gnostic thought. No one will enter the kingdom of heaven without being tested. Marcion's theology was not merely symbolic, it was revolutionary, and for many, heretical. His legacy lives on as one of the most provocative challenges to orthodoxy in the early church, and a reminder of the vast diversity of Gnostic cosmologies. This is only one example of the wide variety of Gnostic sects, each with its own cosmologies, myths, and scriptures. From Valentinus and his Aeons to Basilides and his mystical silence, the Gnostic world was a constellation of visions, some luminous, others unsettling. Let me know in the comments if you'd like a deep dive into the wild mythologies of Gnostic belief systems that shaped early religious thought and left echoes in movements like Manichaeism. And if you're drawn to this kind of hidden knowledge, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. In ancient Greece, a sharp distinction was drawn between philosophers and sophists. While both spoke of wisdom, the philosophers sought truth through reason and contemplation, often embracing a life of simplicity and virtue. The sophist, on the other hand, was often accused of using knowledge as a tool for persuasion and profit. Sophists were skilled rhetoricians, teaching for money, sometimes manipulating truth to win arguments rather than to seek it. Socrates famously criticized them for this, warning that the love of wisdom, philosophia, should not be confused with the appearance of wisdom sold to the highest bidder. In many ways, early critics of Gnosticism viewed it the same way, as a sacred truth turned into a marketable mystery, where knowledge was hidden behind paywalls of secrecy, ego, or elitism. Just as Socrates exposed the sophists' misuse of truth, church fathers sought to expose the corruption of those who turned Gnosis into a tool for control and monetization rather than real spiritual liberation. The idea of selling truth hits home today, with modern gurus charging for enlightenment. Just like not all sophists were frauds, not all Gnostics were manipulative, but the danger lies in turning wisdom into a business. As Manuel Diego Sanchez affirms, Gnosticism often appeared as a seductive, compact, and intellectually rich alternative to Orthodox Christianity. But its claims to superiority and its esoteric, often dualistic cosmology posed a real threat to the fragile identity of the early Christian community. And so, the word Gnosis itself became suspect. It was cast out, nearly erased from theological vocabulary, as if it carried within it a dangerous contagion. But what if we could recover it? Not the sectarian models, not the esoteric pride, but the core experience, the deep, interior awakening that lies beyond ritual, beyond dogma, beyond fear. Because Gnosis, at its heart, is not about secret societies or magical hierarchies and complex mythologies. It is not about paying for enlightenment or ascending invisible heavens. It is about something far more honest, a bridge between faith and reason, between the outer forms of religion and the inner flame of experience. We ask, can Gnosis be rescued? Not as a forbidden word, but as a sacred path. Not as an escape from the world, but as a deeper way of living within it with clarity, compassion, and awakened eyes. But if Gnosticism fragmented into sects, if it became tangled in dogma and secrecy, what was the truth it tried to preserve? The answer is not hidden in temples or carved into esoteric symbols. It is closer, far closer than we think. At the heart of Gnostic thought lies a single liberating idea. The divine is not out there. The divine is within. The true self, your deepest essence, is a spark of the infinite, a fragment of the divine, buried beneath layers of illusion, trauma, conditioning, and noise, but still burning, still alive. This is not just philosophy, it is transformation. Gnosis is not about learning something new, but remembering something ancient, a truth that already lives within the spirit. As the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas says, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. For the Gnostics, salvation did not come through obedience or belief in doctrine. It came through awakening from piercing the illusion of the world and the false self, and encountering the divine light within. They believed this inner knowing could be cultivated through prayer, through meditation, through sacred ritual, through symbolic acts that open the inner eye. Some Gnostic communities spoke of visionary experiences, states of deep stillness, or even transcendence, in which the soul made contact with its divine origin. In modern terms, we might call these mystical states what William James described as ineffable yet noetic. Impossible to describe, yet carrying the undeniable weight of truth. These were not hallucinations or fantasies, they were revelations. Not belief, but knowing. Not imposed doctrine, but lived experience. And this is the essence of Gnosis. It is the kind of knowledge you feel before you can speak it. A light that precedes language. A memory of what you are not what you were taught. And here lies the secret. Gnosis is not exclusive. It's not owned by priests, gurus, or secret orders. It is the birthright of every soul. A modern seeker may not speak of eons or demiurges, but they still long for connection, for wholeness, for that moment when the veil lifts and something eternal breaks through. Whether through contemplation, silence, nature, fasting, breathwork, art, or even psychedelics, human beings across time and culture have found ways to touch something beyond the self. Something sacred. The Gnostics had many myths, many symbols, but their core message? You are not separate. The divine lives in you. And remembering that may be the most radical act of all. But if that's true, if something divine lives within, what exactly is it? What is this spark? And why does Gnosis describe it not only as sacred, but as utterly alien to this world? According to the Gnostic worldview, the human being is not a simple union of body and soul. We are a trinity of elements, body, soul, and spirit. The body, they said, was formed of matter shaped by the Demiurge, the lower creator god. The soul, too, was breathed into us by that same power, animating the body with thought, will, and emotion. But both body and soul are of this world. They are part of the illusion. There is something else, something deeper. The spirit, in Greek, pneuma, is not of this world. It was never created. It is a shard of the unknowable divine, a flame of pure antimatter from a realm beyond space and time. It was not meant to be here. And yet, it is imprisoned here, within each of us. The soul is the bridge between body and spirit. But the spirit is the light from beyond the bridge, yearning to return home. This, the Gnostics believed, is the great torment of human existence. That the divine spirit, pure, radiant, eternal, has been bound within matter, forced to animate a world it does not belong to, trapped in flesh and emotion to serve the designs of a false creator. They said this spirit is what elevated early humanity from animal to conscious being. It is what stirred evolution into motion. But its presence here came at a terrible cost. For the spirit, though sacred, suffers. It does not belong to time, to pain, to death, yet it is bound to all of them. They taught, the spirit is not tethered to the body, but to the soul. And when a person dies without awakening, the soul carries the spirit with it bound still, caught in the wheel of rebirth or the deeper prisons of illusion. And this wasn't metaphor. For Gnostic thinkers, it was metaphysical truth. Imagine it like this. The eternal spirit is a divine spark, placed deep within us. It doesn't blaze like wildfire, it smolders gently, like the glowing tip of an incense stick. Slowly, silently, it consumes the material, the body, the illusions, the ego. Not to destroy, but to transform. Just as incense is consumed and becomes fragrant smoke, rising toward the heavens, so too does the Spirit refine us, elevating the dense into the subtle, the temporal into the eternal. And that's why we age, because the material form cannot hold the eternal spark forever. It begins to break down, crack, and fade, not as a punishment, but as a process, a reminder that this world is not the final home of the divine flame. We age because the eternal is working its way through the finite. This is the secret work of Gnosis. Not a sudden fire, but a slow, sacred transmutation, the soul becoming perfume, rising back to its divine source. The liberation of the spirit, the awakening of the divine spark, is the very goal of human life. This vision once existed within Christianity, too. St. Paul spoke of body, soul, and spirit. So did early church fathers like Origen and even Augustine. But over time, the official doctrine simplified the soul, erasing the spirit. The mystery of our inner divinity was lost. And that perhaps was the greatest loss of all. Because if Gnosis teaches us anything, it's that salvation isn't belief in a higher power, it's the remembrance of our true nature. It is the breaking of the chains, the unchaining of the eternal flame. The spirit is in this world, but not of it. And when it awakens, it does not conform. It does not submit. It transforms. This, then, is the sacred rebellion of Gnosis. Not a rebellion of violence, but of remembrance, of divine light reclaiming itself from darkness. But history was not kind to those who carried this light. Across the centuries, Gnostic groups were hunted, branded as heretics, and silenced. Perhaps the most tragic chapter was the Albigensian Crusade of the 13th century, when the Catholic Church waged war against the Cathars, a Gnostic-inspired sect in southern France. It wasn't a theological debate. It was a massacre. Hundreds of thousands died in what became one of the bloodiest religious purges in medieval history. And yet not all Gnosis was erased. Not all Gnosis was condemned. In fact, one of the great church fathers, Clement of Alexandria, embraced a vision of Christian Gnosis. For Clement, faith was the beginning, but Gnosis was its fulfillment. He saw no contradiction between spirituality and reason. To him, they were two wings of the same soul. He imagined an enlightened Christianity, where the true Gnostikos wasn't a heretic, but a mature believer. Someone who didn't just believe, but understood. Who sought deeper union with the Logos through reason, contemplation, and moral transformation. In Clement's view, the Christian Gnostic was healed in mind and soul, and shaped into a divine likeness not by external conformity, but by inward metamorphosis. His academy, the Alexandrian school, offered a bold project. To bring the wisdom of biblical revelation into dialogue with the best of Greek philosophy. To show that Christianity could be a path not only of faith, but of understanding. For a time, Christian Gnosis walked hand in hand with orthodoxy. And perhaps in our time, it still can. Fast forward 18 centuries, and the hunger for direct experience hasn't gone away. Today, millions meditate, fast, journal, breathe deeply, not to escape life, but to awaken. In a way, the Gnostics were ahead of their time, pioneers of the inner world long before psychology or wellness apps existed. People today aren't looking for dogma. They're looking for contact. They want to feel truth, not just be told about it. That yearning, that sacred restlessness, is the pulse of Gnosis. Even Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, recognized this. He saw in the Gnostic texts not heresy, but insight. He wrote that the Gnostics mapped the inner terrain of the soul using myth, symbol, and vision. For Jung, salvation wasn't about rules or institutions. It was about integrating the divine image within. He famously said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." And that awakening? It's happening again. From the Matrix to bestsellers on the Gospel of Thomas. From esoteric YouTube channels to the psychedelic Renaissance. Gnostic themes are everywhere. Not as dusty dogma, but as living questions. People are hungry. Hungry for depth. Hungry for something real. And maybe that's why you're still watching. Not by chance, but because something inside you is stirring. Something tired of secondhand answers. Tired of borrowed beliefs. You're not here to consume knowledge. You're here to remember. As a Senath Mason once said, "The real power is not contained in the pages of any book, but within the human mind." And the mind of the creative individual can transform fiction into a genuine experience. The Gnostics would agree. The texts are maps. But the journey is yours. And maybe the first step is not outward, but inward. We can't exactly replicate second-century rituals, but the quest for Gnosis, that's timeless. And it's yours to walk right now, today. So if something within you feels stirred, here are 3 ways you can begin your own quest for Gnosis. Meditative reflection. Set aside sacred time. Silence the noise. The Gnostics believe the voice of the divine speaks in silence, not through thunder or command, but as a whisper within. Even 10 minutes a day of quiet presence, letting thoughts settle, can become the doorway to that inner knowing. Know thyself. Keep a journal not just for daily thoughts, but for dreams, intuitions, symbols that recur in your life. Treat them like messages, like pages from your own gospel. Gnostics believed in decoding the self, peeling back layers to remember the divine spark within. This is not self-analysis. It's self-revelation. Seek and you shall find. Whatever your practice, prayer, walking in nature, contemplation of sacred texts, even making art, do it with one intention, not to perform, but to connect, to open the inner eye. The saying, knock, and the door shall be opened, wasn't about entering heaven through a gate. It was about entering yourself. But a word of caution. Yes, our world is one of duality. We live between light and shadow, flesh and spirit, silence and sound. And true Gnosis means finding balance within these opposites, not rejecting them. That doesn't mean there's a good God and a bad God. Matter isn't evil. The body is not a prison. As St. Augustine said, if my soul wants to hug, it uses my body to do it. The body is an extension of the soul, a sacred vehicle for love, action, and transformation. The battle is not between spirit and matter. The true battle is within, between ignorance and awareness, ego and essence. That is real Gnosis. And let this be clear. If religions can become dangerous when corrupted, sects can become worse. No one should ever ask you for money in exchange for sacred knowledge. True wisdom is never sold, it is shared, discovered, remembered. Even in recent times, this pattern has repeated. In South America, movements like the Gnostic Church of Samuel Weir have faced accusations of cultic manipulation and abuse. In Argentina, Luis Felipe Moyano's so-called Hyperborean Gnosis devolved into a system laced with extremism and hate. What began as a quest for light turned into a machinery of fear. And here's the hard truth. No matter how profound a teaching may sound, if it leads you toward division, fear, or hatred, it is not truth. I've seen it myself. The moment a doctrine demands you abandon your conscience or weaponize your spirituality, it's no longer a path to liberation, it's a trap. True Gnosis isn't about allegiance to any sect or secret school. It's not found behind paywalls or cloaked in esoteric jargon. It's not something to be sold, ranked, or hoarded, because the real Gnosis isn't a system, it's a spark. A harmony that resounds when we live aligned with the divine will. A knowing that arises when we find peace within duality, not by rejecting the world, but by redeeming it from the inside out. Matter is not evil. The body is not a prison. The spirit doesn't seek escape, it seeks integration. Balance. Truth. You may find that truth in meditation. It will come in the form your spirit can understand. Just be humble when it does. We began with a question. Could an ancient quest for inner knowledge change your life? The Gnostics would answer with a resounding yes. If you know yourself, you know the divine. And maybe, just maybe, you're watching this now because something in you remembers that truth. So if this journey resonated, consider subscribing to continue exploring ancient wisdom, hidden histories, and the fire that burns at the center of the soul. The quest for Gnosis is not over. It begins again in you. Further reading the books behind the fire. The journey you've just experienced is grounded in study as much as in spirit. These reflections are not merely the product of intuition, but of deep engagement with scholars, mystics, and historians who dared to peer into the heart of sacred mystery. If you wish to go deeper, these are the sources that lit the path. Historia de la Espiritualidad Patrística by Manuel Diego Sanchez. A profound exploration of early Christian spirituality, tracing the soul's ascent from the Desert Fathers to the great mystics of the Church. Christologia Gnostica by Antonio Orbe. One of the most scholarly works on Gnostic interpretations of Christ, this text reveals the nuanced, often misunderstood Christology at the heart of early Gnostic belief. History of Magic by Eliphas Levi, a classic of esoteric literature, weaving together philosophy, occultism, and religious symbolism. Levi's voice bridges the ancient with the modern, showing how hidden knowledge has persisted through the ages. Protagoras y L Logos by Edward Schiappa, a rigorous study on Greek rhetoric and philosophy, shedding light on how language, persuasion, and wisdom intertwined in the birth of Western thought. Foundations crucial to understanding the evolution of sacred knowledge. Heru Aragon, La Religion Prohibita, the Forbidden Religion, a provocative and poetic exposition of Gnostic cosmology and anthropology, exploring the dualistic vision of the world and the imprisoned spirit within man. Necronomicon Gnosis by Asenath Mason, a bold and symbolic work of modern esotericism, exploring how the archetypal quest for Gnosis transcends time and genre. Asenath reminds us that fiction, when approached with reverence, can awaken real experiences within. These are the voices I listen to, the books that open the veils. And if you found resonance in today's journey, I invite you. Seek the texts, test their fire, and let your own spark respond. Thank you all for helping us reach 4,000 subscribers. Your support fuels this journey into ancient wisdom and inner truth. If this resonated with you, share, and subscribe, so we can keep growing together and bringing you the content you deserve. Watch out and take care.